Well, it's just a couple of minutes before 10. Let's go ahead and get started so Carl can get up and, well, welcome everybody here on a beautiful Sunday morning. It's gonna warm back up. We'll have some great spring weather or summer weather again here this week. I want to, begin by saying, this coming Friday is the first day of bell ringing for the Salvation Army. And looking at the sheets, we've taken care of our 2 days in November. So I'll go ahead and carry these to the office so I can put them up on the stand when we set them up. We'll worry about December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day has got some vacancies, but we'll just wait a week. The last one's already finished just about the last day, so we'll thank the class for being willing to do this 4 times. I have a question. Does anybody know, I haven't seen Camille in the last few weeks. Is she gonna be the person that's handling our decision to support a family during Christmas? Is she gonna?
She
is.
is.
All right, I live right down the street from her, so I'll drop a check off there for her, whoever's helping buy this stuff with the family. Do we have any announcements, anything everybody like to share with the class this morning? Yes?
Just a comment to say that, English second language is this week and next week, and I could use some help on Tuesday, and I think Monday's fine. Monday night I was fine, but Tuesday I could use help or 2. And next week, the last night, we're gonna have a dinner. I asked Amy to do her chicken enchilada casserole, which is really excellent. And so anybody that has helped, you're invited to come to that dinner as well. I just need to know who might be interested, because then you can meet the parents, people who worked with the kids, and there won't be a lot of teaching that night. They'll mostly be eating dinner and visiting with the people that have been to that.
Okay, other announcements? All right, well, Carl has a lesson today. We'll let him come up and get started.
We had 3 guys doing some work for us yesterday, and they were Hispanic, and I thought about the class. I thought about, I need to get these guys into class, either that or I need to learn how to speak Spanish, one or the other, so we can communicate better. But they got it done.
They want to speak English?
They very, very broken English, so. Speaking what?
They probably speak it better than you think.
Yeah.
Right, that's the way, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to, thank the Lord for this beautiful day, and thank Him for all of you, and we're gonna talk about a difficult subject today, and I don't have any answers, but I've been thinking about this for a number of weeks, and I think we as a Christian community, we need to talk about this. I can't come up with any answers myself, and maybe there are no answers, but the first thing I wanted to say is how grateful I am for all of you, and to be able to live in a community like we have. The topic we're going to talk about today is Christianity and violence, and that's precipitated by what's going on in the Middle East. So the history of the Middle East, did we have a good historian? Does anybody wanna tell how we got where we are in the Middle East? Go ahead.
First of all, I'm not qualified, okay?
You want,
I am not qualified.
okay,
However,
neither am I.
if we remember, the Crusades occurred in that part of the world.
Yeah.
Back in what, the 1300s?
Yeah.
Fast forward to the latter part of the 19th century, Zionism came about. Concept of a homeland for the Jews. At that time, Palestine had only about 3% Jews. The movement originated in Eastern and Central Europe. A lot of anti-Semitic activity. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration took that up. Balfour was the foreign minister of Great Britain. The Ottoman Empire, which are the Turks, had ruled that area for about 400 years. The Balfour Declaration advocated for a homeland for the Jews. That finally occurred in 1948. Now, for that to happen, about 700,000 Palestinians were removed from their homeland. There was a war in 48, violence. There was another war in 67, another one in 73. Now, during that time, there was some progress made with the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Syrians. And I think we're all old enough to remember when President Carter had the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, and the head of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, at Camp David. And that was a reconciliation of basically Israel and Egypt at that time. There have been a lot of intervening things that have gone on. I think we all remember Yasser Arafat of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which basically was the spokesperson for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip came from Egypt. Over the years, the Israelis removed themselves, and in 2007, Hamas gained political control from the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And they, in essence, have been in control since then. And they're a terrorist organization and a political organization. And Israel had made the decision to coexist with them. But as we know, October 7th, all of that blew up. And the Palestinian people, for I would say at least since 1948. Most of those people back then are gone, but their ancestors still have knowledge that they were forced from their homeland.
Palestine.
Now, it's a very complicated situation. And what I've said is what little I know about it, but there's a whole lot more.
So it's all over that 7 mile strip.
Well, the strip, as I understand, is
The Gaza Strip.
6-7 miles wide,
Yeah.
20 to 25 miles
Long,
long.
yeah, but I'm saying it's that 7 mile strip that all this is over.
No, it's also over the West Bank, and the Golan Heights, which are up in the northeastern corner, actually close to Galilee. And another factor, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, and as I understand, they're Shia Muslims. And then you have Hamas, who are Sunni Muslims.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's much better than I can do. The only thing I would add there is that the UN resolution that granted the Israelites, and the Jews, the chance to go back to their ancestral homeland, that resolution allowed that to take place. It was a strange vote, and I won't go into that, but Ken?
Well, I think, Marshall really hit the nail on the head, but, Hamas and Hezbollah are also controlled mostly by Iran, but the other issue that I'm thinking about when I think about the history is you look back at Jesus' time, and the Romans really had taken over that entire area, and the Romans had decreed certain Jewish leaders to be in charge of the population at that time. And they were pretty much controlled, as we all know and read the Bible, that they were controlled entirely by the Romans. And the Romans controlled that area with kind of an iron fist. At the time, the Jewish leaders, the Israelite leaders who were there, were really under their control. They were either for greed or ego or whatever, they were in control. And at the time, there were a lot of both Arabic and also Jewish settlers who lived in that area, but that was their homeland. That's basically where they all had settled from the beginning of time, from the beginning of their era. And there were many different tribes in Judaism at the time. There were Zealots and others who were anti-Romans, who were trying to, one way or another, wage war against the Romans. Well, that also happened on the Arabic side. So war has been going on there. Let's put it this way, war has been going on there for a long, long time, probably from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And the other issue today is that area is, like Marshall really pointed out, since 1947 when that decree came out, there was an issue of, okay, what do we do because of what's happening in Germany? What do we do because of what's happened to this group of individuals? Where do they settle? Well, they all wanted to go back to quote unquote their homeland. So
The
that's,
UN vote was primarily reparation to the Jews for the Holocaust.
it was giving them some land for
Yeah.
the people they
Yeah.
lost.
But where else did they look for land for the Jews?
Uganda.
They looked in Uganda. They looked in multiple places in South America that were willing to give up some land. And why didn't the Jews take that land? Because they knew they were gonna be in a fight if they moved back. Why would they choose to go back to Israel? Where had they been since the Babylonian exile
Eastern Europe, I mean, but basically the temple. Jerusalem also was the site of, interestingly enough, both Arabic and Israeli kind of beginning, and the religious component of that was, this is where we began, this is where our temple is, this is important to us.
So, and actually, they divided Jerusalem up into 4 parts in 1948, and so we have this just real simple, straightforward problem that's larger than anybody can get their mind around. But historically, when we think back to the Old Testament, what do we find there in terms of God's promise to Abraham? What did he promise him?
He would be the father of the multitudes.
Father of multitudes. What else did he promise him?
The land of milk and honey.
This is your land. So I promise you land, and I promise you that you'll be the most important segment of society, or at least that's what the Old Testament says. None of that. That is a big part of why the Jewish community would only choose that land, that particular land. They considered that to be their birthright, and their God had given them that land, and that's where they wanted to go back. So that's that Zionist movement. The problem, as Marshall says, there are 750,000 Palestinians who had occupied that land since the exile, the Babylonian exile. And so here we have these people that have been living there, the Palestinians, for a long, long time. They considered that their home. And then we have this UN resolution along with other things happening that we need reparation for the Jews. The Holocaust was awful, and we're going to give them some land, and we're going to give them the land that they want, and so that is Israel. And it took one day, I think, before they started fighting. The first day that the Jews started coming back into Israel, they started fighting almost immediately. Okay. Whew, it's hard. So the real question here is, what should we, as Christians, what should we be doing? We can't really directly influence the situation, but in terms of the covenant that Jesus had with us, where we are to love him and to love our neighbors, that's everybody else, then we get into a bit of a conflict there, because we feel like we really need to maybe choose a side, because some of it's obvious that horrendous things are done. I don't know if you saw this in the paper a week ago. My granddad used to say the Hickory Daily Liar, Hickory Daily Record, but it's a strategy of violence. Okay, so that's been the strategic plan from day one, even the politics of the situation. I wanted to look, first of all, at after we got through the history lesson, is look at what Jesus was saying to the people of his time, and some misconceptions that we sometimes use to justify violence as a Christian way of dealing with things. So let's look at Matthew 10, 34 through 37. I'm going to have Cindy read the King James Version, so, because here we go to, people believing in the version of the interpretation of the Bible that they have in front of them, and they take that sort of literally, it justifies one way of action, or if you take that, spiritually, it may mean something else. Cindy, would you read that, please?
Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I come not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. And a man's foe shall be that of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son and daughter more than me is not worthy of me.
So what's the key word there? It's in the first verse, where he says, I have not come for peace, but I have what? Sword. Okay. That's not the Hebrew interpretation. It's gone from Greek to Latin to English, and that's the King James Version. So let me read to you that same couple verses of scripture from the Message, which is Hebrew, which is the language that the Jews spoke then and now, to modern English. And Cindy says it's too modern for her, but let me read that. And this again is chapter 10 in Matthew, and it's verse 34 through 37. Don't think I've come to make life cozy. Okay, that's a little different than I haven't come to bring you peace. I've come to give you a sword. A little different. Okay, you feel different about that when you read that? I've come to cut and make a sharp knife cut between son and father, daughter and mother, bride and mother-in-law. Cut through those cozy domestic arrangements and free you up for God. Well-meaning family members can be your worst enemies. If you prefer father or mother over me, you don't deserve me. If you prefer son or daughter over me, you don't deserve me. If you don't go all the way with me, then you'll never find both yourself and me. Okay, so there's the same verses of scripture, but they literally mean, and they can be used to justify some of the things that have happened by Christians to justify wars, the Crusades. Marshall mentioned the Crusades. Christians felt like the Muslims were infidels and we've got to go kill them because they don't believe like we believe. Let me read also from Matthew 5:9. This is part of what we call the Beatitudes. Jesus says here, you're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. Okay, does that sound like violence? Do you? I guess you're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. And let's look at Matthew 5, 38 and 39. Have any of you read the Message? That the verses are tiny. It's extra, it's large print. a tiny little verse, so I'm trying to find the verse here. Okay, this is entitled, Love Your Enemies. Here's another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose, and the person talking is Jesus. Don't hit, back at all. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it. If someone drags you into court and sues you for the shirt off your back, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it to them. And if someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit for tat stuff. Live generously. Wow, that's a little different, isn't it? That pretty much rules out violence, at least as a standard way of responding to our neighbors.
Carl,
Yes.
I disagree.
Yeah.
What you just said made me realize how much I disagree with that idea. You said it rules it out as a standard way.
Violence.
It rules it out as the ideal way to manage communication with people. That's God's way to love your neighbor. But that is not human nature, and it is not history, and it has not happened. And we don't have to justify that. I mean, I just can't. That's like justifying the evil that we see in the world and say, well, you know, we're not supposed to do any violence, and that's the standard way. I don't think that is the standard way.
So,
I think it is the ideal.
so what was Jesus all about? I mean, what was his
He was
ministry all
about
about?
the ideal. He was about the vision, the spiritual vision.
And to
Okay?
whom are we supposed to base our actions on?
Jesus.
Jesus, okay.
Yes.
So when Jesus says this is not a good way, an ideal way to respond, he's not saying, and I know just because you read this, you're gonna do it. He's gonna say, if you want to follow me, this is what you need to try to be doing. Now, obviously, we don't do
Well,
that.
that's a different thing than saying that's the standard way. That's the everyday way to do it.
That's
Okay.
wordsmithing, I think.
Yeah. If there's a disagreement,
I think
It's wordsmithing.
it's wordsmithing.
my opinion simply is it's human interpretation from all great faithful leaders and religious leaders over time. I think of Gandhi, I think of others who've all called for peace or nonviolence. And we all are humans. I think Pam hits the nail on the head again, because we're all humans and we have these beliefs and we have these feelings. And if you read today, you realize that a lot of people from the Muslim faith are even talking about that religion is the only religion that's the religion that should be for everyone. So it's if you look at other parts of the country, other parts of the world, Christians are just as much pursued as people who are Israelites or Jews.
Mhm.
So the bottom line is it's our human interpretation of what Jesus and God is trying to tell us that we should be like. But even from Adam and Eve's time, we haven't listened.
Yeah, I'm very poor job. And really, none of the things that God, or that we see in the Old Testament where God said to Abraham, will make of you a great nation. And the Jewish people, of course, experience more trials and tribulations than any other group of people that I know of. But I think the point that we're all sinners and that we sin every day doesn't minimize the fact that we're trying to be as Christ-like as we possibly can be. Will we ever get there? Not ever. But we have the opportunity, and because of grace, we can say, failed today, Lord, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I'm a sinner, I'm gonna try to do better tomorrow.
Oh, this morning they announced, of course, the results of the, church conference that they had, yesterday, was that when it was? 131 churches disaffiliated from the Methodist Church, so that just kind of gives you a good example of how we get along. We
Yeah.
can't resolve issues, you know.
Where do most of those issues come from? What part of the Bible would you find most of the things that people are arguing about? You're delegates, so you know this a whole lot better than I do.
I think it comes from cultural, cultural, sensitivities of today. You're gonna say it's from the Old Testament, but it isn't. And you will tell me that I'm
You just try to preempt you.
You don't write your Bible.
I forgot what I was gonna say.
We forget that even Israelites did not listen to the word of God, because if you remember, over 100,000 of them committed suicide in Masada when the Romans were after them. Now that was against Jewish law, but they all just walked off that cliff and that was it. So throughout the history of the world, and the other thing I think that to me is interesting, and I never believed it before I became older, is we forget history, or we read history that isn't really history. To really know what the truth of history is like is amazing, because you find out that we keep repeating things.
What's the saying? I don't know where it came from. It said, if you don't learn it and don't respect it and don't understand it, you're gonna repeat it.
Yep.
And we're doing this study of Genesis on Wednesday nights. And so we're delving into those agreements with Abraham and all that. And, you know, so often we set out there that to call the Jewish people the chosen people, that's almost like a slur against a group of people. But when we studied it in Genesis, it isn't really about that. It's God's vision for this people to be able to be a light to the world. And they aren't, but as Christians, we aren't either. You know, we're all, from history back, from the beginning, we keep repeating it because we're human and we're fallible and we're separate, you know. And the only way any of us get there is to recognize that humanity and not to call out one group against the other, or to say, you know, that it's, well, the Jews should never have been the chosen people, or the Muslims, like you're saying, the Muslims now are saying they should be the only religion. It's just people against each other.
Is that why people are leaving the United Methodist Church?
They're leaving the United Methodist Church because of this clause that allows them to, so that they can go pick and choose and fight against each other.
What's the biblical reference that's used to
It's not
justify?
a biblical reference, it's in the book of discipline. It's a paragraph that allows them to leave the church, keep their property, if they claim that they disagree with, what is it?
I
Cindy, the
disagree.
phrase
I
that's-
disagree with that. I think they're leaving because of the LGBTQ.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
That's the bottom line.
but that's out of the discipline. It's not from what's in the Bible.
No, it's
what's
from the
written
Old
into-
Testament as well.
Well, it's in there, but it's, what's being done is because of what was written in the discipline in 2019 and how they set it up.
The foreman of the job that we had done at our house yesterday, was a United Methodist. But they voted to disaffiliate. And I said, what made you guys decide that? One was homosexuality, and his, belief that it's in the Bible. And that's what he kept saying. He justified, we want to do what's in the Bible. And of course, I just listened. I didn't say anything because
You
I
didn't
didn't.
offer to cut off his hand.
No.
To the New Testament,
Yeah.
when they say that.
I don't think they do because
I don't
they're
think they do
different.
either.
They're different paradigms. The Old Testament paradigm is a different paradigm than the New Testament. That we broke away from Judaism to become Christians for a reason, because Jesus was talking about spiritual kinds of things, and the Jews were interested in a warrior to free them from the Romans. That's what they wanted, even more than what Jesus presented to them. They wanted to be free from the Romans. Okay, and that's a different paradigm that we follow in the New, from Old Testament to the New Testament. Is Jesus? Let me put this in form of a question. What kinds of rules did Jesus lay down for ownership of land, possessions? What was his
Give
rule
it
of thumb?
all, give it all away.
Give it all up. So ownership is an illusion. We don't own anything.
We were stewards rather than owners.
We're stewards rather than owners. Anybody follow the Indigenous American celebration on Monday? You follow that? You know, that was one of the reasons that Indigenous Americans gave up their land, was because they didn't believe that it actually belonged to them.
We didn't belong to anybody.
It didn't belong to anybody. It's just we're stewards, and we're nomadic, so we travel around, and their God would provide for them in that way. Very spiritual group. Anything else that Jesus said?
Well, yesterday, our bishop sounded like Jesus to me.
Okay.
Everything he said was positive. It was, the people who have disaffiliated, we love those people. That is their choice. You don't talk to them about getting them back in the, United Methodist Church. They've made their choice, and their choice is right for them. So everything he said was very inspirational and positive. So I don't see why we keep fighting about this, because we've chosen to stay, they've chosen to leave. But, I mean, we've got a brother who has chosen to leave and disaffiliate, and we don't have a discussion with him about it, because that's what he chose to do. I think that's, counterintuitive to be thinking about they're who we're fighting with now. We're not fighting with the people who disaffiliated.
Yeah.
And he's saying he does not want them to fight with us and come try to take people from the Methodist Church into their church.
Violence is not, violence begets violence, whether it's physical violence or whether it's just talk. That kind of talk only begets what you're trying not for it to get to.
Any time the world, to me, anytime the world is in crisis or chaos, there's always gonna be a quote-unquote Messiah. And that Messiah can call for goodness or grace or evil. And you know, we've heard all the stories about, it seems like 1935 rather than 2023. We realize that if you think about what's happening in Israel, in Palestine, and you think about Ukraine, and you look back at the Franco War in Spain, you realize that, again, as Roger said, history is repeating itself in many, many different ways, and we're ignoring it.
Mm-hmm.
We're ignoring it because we believe that things will not get worse. And we listen to people, as you just said, we listen to a lot of people who perhaps aren't preaching goodness for others rather than just for themselves.
Well, I was just gonna say, along with what Cindy said, when we were listening to the bishop yesterday, it's, you know, it feels like, each person just needs to grapple with this. When we try to draw distinctions between groups and say, as Christians, we should be this, or, you know, this is not what, it's so ill-defined through all of history and through all of the Bible. I've heard Paul say 100 times, just about everything you find in the Bible, you can find the opposite. Right in the Bible, you know, so to try to pick and choose and say, this is what's a good Christian, and, you know, this, we have to grapple with that within ourselves.
What all we're supposed to do is love each other.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
The two greatest commandments
Yeah,
are.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
as simple as the cross and as difficult as the cross. Because this is our relationship with Jesus or God or whatever you call him. And this horizontal relationship is our relationship with everybody else. And the central theme of Christianity has always been, always will be, is love. So violence, if not exactly opposite, is certainly not mentioned in Christianity. Now, the Bible is a complicated, oftentimes contradictory, ambiguous book. It's very difficult to read just because of what Pam said. You can justify almost anything you want to by taking a scripture out of context and quoting it. You can find the opposite somewhere else. And that's, unless we just throw away the Bible, then it's always gonna be that way.
But I thought with the coming of Jesus Christ, that was to change some of the attitudes of the Old Testament, and that we were to move forward as Christians and to love our neighbor and to love God only. It seems like as Christians, we're supposed to be moving towards that, what Jesus said, and not going back to thousands of years of strife and violence and everything. And I'm sure that's the reason all these countries are asking for a ceasefire, because it's not getting us anywhere.
Well,
We need humanitarian efforts. We're destroying people, we're killing people, and it's not right.
Jennifer's sermon, part of her sermon today, which I thought was really good, is that she was talking about Christ calling out the priests and the kings, you know, and said their message is not bad. Follow what the words are, but don't follow their actions, because they're set themselves up on the higher plane. So it wasn't that the message was bad, it was that the actions were. And that's the primary message, is we need to hear those words and follow them, not what the actions are.
You know, I think we have a lot of people who look at our churches today, and we can't hardly get along in our church, and they say, well, why do we need to go to church? And it seems like our churches are falling backwards. We're losing people.
Our churches are made up of human beings, and human beings will always be fallible, and that's Pam's point. The fact that we're made the way we are made physiologically will always lead us, or almost always lead us, or tempt us to do things that Jesus said, I don't want you doing that. I don't want a tooth for a tooth. I don't want violence because you have had violence perpetrated against you. Is that hard to do? It's very hard to do. It'd be almost impossible if you were defending you or your family, or if you're defending your nation, that seems, that always throws, me, when I'm thinking about that. I don't know that I could take another person's life, but I don't know what I would feel like if I were in that situation and had to make that decision. Would I do what Jesus said, or would I defend myself? I don't know. Somebody else?
I think, you talk about Judea law. I think if you look at Judea law before it was corrupted, as you said, by people who wanted strictly violence. It was the idea of protecting the home, protecting, and if you look at the laws, the religious laws of the Torah, matter of fact, they all really relate not to violence, but they relate to everything we're talking about today as Christians. The problem is, again, misinterpretation by people who were leaders at that time, who carried on the idea that this is our chosen land, or we are the chosen people, therefore we come before everybody else. And that interpretation created huge problems.
And people deciding for other people. So much of what happened in the Middle East is cause coming out of wars, the people that won the war decided who gets the spoils, who gets the land, who gets this or that, instead of it being the people affected the most.
Okay, we're about out of time, so I wanted to finish with a couple verses of scripture from Philippians. You know, even in the New Testament, we can go back to the writings of Paul. And a professor one time said Christians could be called Paulinians almost, because we read primarily what Paul wrote in his interpretation of what Jesus meant to him, and the way that he saw that. Now, remember that Paul thought Jesus was coming back next week too, so no human being is infallible or perfect. But I like these verses of scripture because they're positive. First of all, in verse 4, always be full of joy, and this is Philippians 4. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, your primary job is to rejoice in the Lord. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all that you do. And it goes on to say in verse 6, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace. God's peace. It's God's peace. It's pretty tough to describe it. One of the psychologists friend of mine said it's learning from the past, but not trying to live in the past. It's having faith and hope in the future. It's not judging other people. All those things disrupt the peace that God would provide to us. It goes on and says that peace will exceed anything that we can understand. So the fact that we're confused about some of these things is verified by what we read here. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, and this will be our closing thought. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw from me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Amen? Thanks.
Mark, let me see that. Let me see that picture.
Carl, there was, I got a,
Have a good week.
Fabulous job.